And now I invite the elected officials and Carrie Sanders up to the stage. And as they make their way up, I'll introduce Carrie, who will be facilitating this conversation. Carrie's on faculty at Edgewood College's Social Innovation and Sustainable Leadership program, also called SISL, where she teaches on topics of economic and social sustainability, community development, and social innovation. She is the founder of the Hope Community Capital, a national community development finance consultancy focused on driving financial and human capital for the development of sustainable, equitable, and thriving communities. Carrie's expertise includes raising and deploying diverse community development finance resources for sustainable, community-driven projects throughout the nation. She has worked as an urban planner and a development finance lead for the city of Kansas City, Missouri, and as a senior consultant in real estate transaction work for a global consulting and accounting firm, Baker Tilly, and as the VP of lending for a statewide community loan fund. Carrie also has a master's degree in city planning from MIT. Please join me in welcoming Carrie, who will introduce the rest of our elected officials. Thank you so much, Carrie.
All right, welcome to this distinguished panel of change makers and disruptors. I first want to introduce, to my left, Wenona Wolf. Wenona joins us as the Policy and Legislative Director with the Office of Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. She is a citizen of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. Previously, she was the Communication and Development Director for Kids Forward, and her work is rooted in her burning desire to create legal and public channels accessible to all. On her left is Madison Mayor Satya Rhodes-Conway. Satya Rhodes-Conway is the 58th mayor of Madison, and she has extensive experience in local policy and practice. She has worked with mayors across the country for over a decade and has served 3 terms on the Madison Common Council. Elected in 2019, she is the city's 2nd female mayor and the first out LGBTQ person to serve as mayor of Madison. To her left is Joe Parisi, Dane County Executive. Joe Parisi has called Dane County home his entire life. He was first elected as county executive, the chief elected leader of Dane County in 2011, after 6 years in the state assembly and 8 years as Dane County clerk. Joe's priority is to ensure that everyone in our community has access to the opportunity to succeed. And to his left is Mayor Aaron Richardson, mayor of Fitchburg. Aaron Richardson was elected mayor of Fitchburg in 2019 after serving on city council for 2 years. Prior to serving on council, Aaron spent 9 years on the Park Commission and was born and raised in Fitchburg and is the 5th generation of his family to live in Fitchburg. As mayor, Aaron is committed to listening to residents and taking a long-term view on issues. Welcome. So before we start on our journey, our interviews here today, I just wanted to reorient or orient the audience with this idea of regenerative and generative sustainability, regenerative communities, and co-designing such a thing. So what are we really talking about? So we started our talk today, our event today, with a quote from the 2018 book, Designing Regenerative Cultures, authored by David Christian Wall. And this is sort of the root of this idea of a regenerative culture and the development of that. A regenerative human culture is healthy, resilient, and adaptable. It cares for the planet, and it cares for life, in the awareness that this is the most effective way to create a thriving future for all of humanity. The idea is that a generative society is something to be designed. And you'll notice that our theme is regenerate for well-being. There's that re, as if we have the capacity to generate, to create a generative society, but now it's about renewal and reintroducing that and reinvigorating that. So the idea of a regenerative society is that the future of our species, the diversity of life, and the continued evolution of consciousness is the center of our efforts to more equitably, sustainably, and rapidly create systems change in our communities, in our organization, and in our world. And that is why we have invited these change makers up here. So the idea here is that a regenerative culture, a regenerative society, appreciates multiple perspectives to gain a shared understanding of our participation, our shared participation in our ecological and social communities. These key acts of co-leadership, I emphasize co-leadership, can initiate and support opportunities for regenerative well-being. Okay. So some examples of this. What does this look like? So examples of flourishing regenerative well-being in our society include opportunities for communities to connect with nature, okay? To collectively enact efforts to support flourishing and diverse ecosystems. A regenerative community is a community where power is shared. Power is shared between and among those who are impacted the most by the outcome of the initiative, the project, and on. A regenerative community is a space and a place where differing perspectives are encouraged. Results are co-created from a diverse set of perspectives, skills, and experiences that are brought to bear through these spaces of dialogue in our community. Conflict transformation becomes a natural part of engaging diverse perspectives and developing these generative processes. A deep consideration of the relationship between self and nature, self and others, and self in the decision-making process are paramount. So, with that, just a premise, I want to invite our panelists to share a place in Dane County where they have connected with nature, where they have bridged that divide between self and nature, and have connected with it in our midst. Wenona?
I guess the easiest answer to that is the lakes. I think in the summer, enjoying being out kayaking on the lakes. Another probably favorite that I'm going to throw out there that is not really outdoors, but the Dane County Farmers Market, which I think also is an example of some of the things that we're talking about, sustainability and food and being a community.
Thank you for mentioning the farmers market. I think that my reaction to the question is that it's easy for white people to think about how we connect with nature, but it's less easy for us to think about how we connect with other people as just a cultural relic, or maybe that's just wasps. So my nature moment is usually looking out my kitchen window at my bird feeder and appreciating the nuthatches and the chickadees and the house sparrows and the finches. That's mostly where I get to connect.
Once again, the mayor and I have so much in common. It's crazy. When you asked me, when you told me you were going to ask this question, my immediate thought was my yard. I don't have a very big yard. I live in, I guess you call it a new urbanist neighborhood, but I've taken that yard and did research into native plants and to see what would attract birds and butterflies, etc. And it's great therapy being out there and planting all these trees and flowers over the years, and then watching the birds and the insects and the squirrels and all the animals that my neighbors try to chase away. They all come into my place and hang out. So I have like all this different action under the bird feeder every morning. It's great. With rabbits and squirrels, there's a possum the other day. It's great. So a long way of saying my yard.
I'd say one of the ways I connect in Dane County is on the Capital City Trail. You know, jumping on my bike, especially the part that goes right through Fitchburg out to Lake Farms Park. Especially if you go in the morning, you'll see turkeys and cranes and deer and all kinds of things like that. You can take the bridge now all the way to McFarland, and you can see the lakes, which is a piece of that as well. But for me, it's probably that first, and my backyard as well, especially when I'm doing my beekeeping. But the Capital City Trail.
Thank you. So as we delve into some of these questions, I just want to kind of frame out the structure for how we're going to look at this. And we're going to employ an adaptation of a tool called appreciative inquiry, okay? So we're going to talk about the discovery of where this idea of generative society and culture has worked well in the midst of their work, right? Of their service in our community. Where has that worked well? We're going to discover some examples of the best of regenerative society and co-creation that we've experienced. And then we're going to move to dream. We're going to have a vision about, or have a discussion about what this vision of a regenerative society, how it could be expanded and amplified, happening more, how it could be accessible to all. What does that vision, what would the dream of that look like? Then we're going to talk about some design. Okay, so we have a vision, we have a dream, this is possible, it is. But what are some of the design barriers, opportunities, if we were to really implement something as esoteric sounding as a generative society? And then destiny. What's the call to action? What are the strongest opportunities, really, to co-design a society that offers well-being for all? What could that look like? How might we design that? What is the destiny? So that's kind of an overview of an adaptation of what I'm using as appreciative inquiry. It's something we use a lot in our social innovation and sustainability leadership program. And I really look forward to exploring this idea with our guests here. And we'll just start right away with the Discover example. So I'm just going to share a question, and then I'm just going to invite whomever feels that they have something to respond to just go ahead and add to that. So I gave a little example, an overview of what is regenerative well-being. What does that mean? And I have to ask, where have you seen that happening in your work, in your community, in the way that you're interacting with our community, whether it be policy, communication, onward? Where have you seen this regenerative well-being happening?
So I think regenerative well-being is rooted in Indigenous communities. I don't think it's for Indigenous people, it's not a new concept. It is our way of life, it is how we are raised, and we have a connection with the community, and we practice sustainability, throughout our lifetimes. Our culture and our well-being is rooted with the environment, and we know that requires us to be stewards of the land. So I think this, we can look towards Indigenous communities to get guidance on how we go back to caring for the earth and connecting with community and improving the well-being of others. In my travels with the Lieutenant Governor, we have met with almost all of the Indigenous tribes here in Wisconsin, and they have shared amazing things with us of the things that they are doing, ahead of state government, ahead of local governments in caring for the land, and finding solutions. And oftentimes they've been forced to do that because they are also one of the groups of people that are most impacted by climate change.
Thank you.
So I think there's a number of things going on in the city of Madison. We have some work that's about connecting kids to nature. We've been working with the National League of Cities on over the years, and we're currently trying to figure out how to sustain that work into the future. But there's also just grassroots efforts on that front that I particularly am familiar with the work that goes on in the north side, because that's where I live. Taking kids from Sherman School in particular to Warner Park and connecting them with nature. So there's really exciting work that's happening there. And I think that there's any number of other initiatives that we would more traditionally call sustainability initiatives that are happening in the city. And I get a little impatient with the categorizing and the new names and the new labels. And so, once upon it was environmental, and now it's sustainable, and now it's regenerative, and I don't know, I'm impatient with that. I don't have time for the academic frameworks. I have time to do the work. And so, I feel like there's a lot of, sorry. I feel like there's a lot of people sitting in rooms talking. And that, I really frame the work in my mind as twofold, right? There's work that we need to do personally in our own lives, right? And that's work like, don't go online and buy stuff from Amazon. Go to your local farmer's market instead. But it's also work like expand your community. So that when we're talking about what is the work, that you're talking to communities of color about what their work is, right? And then there's the larger systems-based work, which is thinking about how government, and that's what we all should be thinking about, how we make it easier for people to do the right thing, whether that's around traditional sustainability or environmental work or around race and equity and connection to community. And so, I don't know, I just switched your framework on you, but that's how I think about it.
I'll try to bring it back.
See, this is why we make a good team.
So, wow, there's so much. So to focus in on it, I mean, maybe I'll off of the point about indigenous communities and people who are impacted, for example, by climate change. What we find is when we look at climate change, for example, the people who are usually the least responsible for creating it are the people who are impacted the most. And so in county government, we have a number of major greenhouse gas reduction initiatives underway that I can talk a little bit about as we move on, as well as an effort, Keith Riopel from our Office of Energy and Climate Change is here today, an effort community-wide to bring partners together to create a community-wide climate action plan. And so one of the ways we've gone about the environmental sustainability piece is all of the projects we're doing there, plus creating an Office of Energy and Climate Change within the County Executive's Office to spearhead this piece of it. But I think what's also important to talk about when we look at sustainability is the question of equity. We can't have sustainability unless we're attacking equity head on. If we look at any measure of well-being across the board, if you look at different regions, different countries, and you look at it as far as equity and income inequality, those that do the best with equity and the best with income inequality have the best outcomes in all of the areas we care about. On a local level, we've created over the past few years in Dane County government, first an Office of Equity and Inclusion named in honor of Tamara Grigsby, who was an amazing person in our community who worked toward equity and really helped me develop our entire equity agenda. We've also created a Department of Immigration Assistance within county government, which I think is probably the first and only in the nation, to help our immigrant neighbors, particularly in these times when people are under constant attack from the federal government. So we try to look at sustainability in the broadest sense, from environmental sustainability to equity, to economic stability, et cetera. I'll stop there and I can talk a little bit more about it later in greater detail.
When you talked about regenerative well-being, I guess I really thought first of Fish Hatchery Road in our city. It's an area, especially from Key Road north of the Beltline, that is really the oldest part of our city, and it's an area where we're starting to do some redevelopment. And as we're doing that, we're looking at ways to make it more environmentally friendly, make sure that we're still protecting things like the Nine Springs E-Way, but also how can we provide more opportunities for people who live in those communities to have green space, open space, space to recreate, because there's a huge lack of that right now in that community, in that area of the city. And how can we make that part of the city more appealing? And it's really the front door to our city. And so as we're looking at that and we're trying to improve that area, that's one of the things that we've even seen recently. We did a survey, updating our comprehensive plan, asking people, what things do you like about the city? What do you really enjoy? And we heard a lot about park space and open space. And when you have a part of our city that is really lacking those things, how can we connect that to other parts of the city through bike paths, but also providing space in those communities? So that's something that, as we're redeveloping that area, we're trying to add.
Well, as we're continuing to discover some things that have worked well, to, as the mayor stated, the work, the real work, right? What has contributed to that? We just had a wonderful list of some things we need to be paying attention to. You mentioned equity, and we mentioned many of the comes, right? Some of the projects, some of the outputs that have come because of these initiatives, but what has contributed in the past to the outcome that we're talking about now, right? What we're, again, discovering, what were those elements that contributed to the fruition of the things we just discovered, right, that are working well? What were those elements that made it happen? Who might add to that?
Well, I think to the mayor's point of reaching out and working with the people who you are trying to help, right? I mean, rather than coming in from top down and saying, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. What we try to do in county government with policy development is work with the community and start within the community. For example, our 2020 budget includes an initiative to provide greater access to mental health services through community centers and neighborhood centers. And so that came from visiting with community centers and people in the community and neighborhood centers and asking them what their challenges were and what they needed, right? And so then we get that feedback. And so we put this initiative in the budget, and once the money was in the budget, we invited the folks back who work with people in the community centers and run the community centers to ask them how to develop the programming so that it fit their needs, rather than saying, okay, we're going to bring in some mental health help and plop it down in your neighborhood community center. We invited folks in. So, you know, you have the neighborhood center in Teresa Terrace, which has 1 or 2 staff people, and everything in between, all the way up to the, I still call it the Edgewood Community Center, the Becky Steinhoff's Community Center, that has a ton of people, right? And so each center is going to want and need a different model. So it's important to invite the people on the ground to tell you what they need and to be partners in designing the programming that you want to put together. And that's the approach we've tried to take with all the initiatives that we put together, be it mental health, equity, immigration, environmental sustainability, et cetera, if that makes any sense.
Thank you.
I think that's a really important piece of it. And so another piece related to that is that you do need to have someone who is in a position of power to hold that space, right? To create that space and hold it for communities. And so one thing that I think that the city has tried to do, and I think that we need to do even better on, is particularly through our community services process and the way in which we fund organizations in the community, is to hold space for good ideas, particularly from communities that have traditionally not been funded.
And then also from like a bottom-up approach, I think. And for state government, that is both approaches that we are taking. You know, from day one, Governor Evers and Lieutenant Governor Barnes have signaled to Wisconsin that we are bringing science back. I think my boss actually stood on stage the night of election, and the first thing he screamed when we had a chance to scream something was, "We're bringing science back to Wisconsin." He loves telling that story. But you know, we sent a signal to Wisconsin that it's okay to talk about this. We had to tell our agencies, you can do the stuff that you haven't been able to do. You can do science, you can use research. And we were going to use science-based approaches in everything from health to climate work to, you know, and the DNR and everywhere else that it's applicable. In addition, because we right now live in a state with divided government, and because we have a national leader that is telling the world that climate change isn't real and that the United States isn't serious about it, we also have to look at look at it from a micro scale, and we have a lot of cities and states and tribes or cities, counties, and tribes in Wisconsin that are setting their own ambitious goals and starting to do the work right there in the communities. And I think they serve as models for state government, for national government, and they are also going to be the people that help us move closer to the goals that we're setting.
I want to add something because I think it's a thing for all of you to take away, and that is, if we're talking about the policymaking process, right? If we're talking about things that government does, one of the things that brings success is demand from our constituencies. And so, we can show leadership around climate and sustainability and equity issues, but it is easier both for us to show that leadership and for us to move things within government if there is a constituency for that. If there is a positive constituency saying, I want my government to work on climate change, I want my government to work on affordable housing. I want my government to provide more transit, right? And that means you reaching out to us, but also to our legislative bodies, maybe particularly at the state level, although, council could always hear from you as well, and to let them know what your priorities are. All too often, at the city level at least, and I imagine this is true in Fitchburg and Dane County, we hear from people who don't want things, right? Who are against things, who don't like an idea. And we don't hear from the positive side of things. So it is really useful, that's part of what makes it possible, is for there to be a constituency out there.
Thank you. I think you've really helped me lead on to the next section, which is that vision, okay? The dream part of appreciative inquiry. So the question largely is, how can a regenerative society, where well-being for all is the center point, right? How can this grow and become more accessible? What does a thriving place like that, where well-being for all is possible, what does that look like? What elements are already in place? What future can you imagine for our region, where well-being for all is a real possibility? So I'd love to hear any thoughts with that. And the mayor shared, a constituency matters. A constituency that has come together and voiced that is a starting point. So what else might you add? What might this thriving place where well-being for all is a real possibility? What might that look like? What's that vision?
I think the mayor kind of had a nice lead into that. I mean, for me, it's, obviously there are a number of pieces in it, but I think it starts with looking at what we can do instead of complaining about what we can't do, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with us saying what we're against, because there are bad things that we need to be against, but focusing not only on what we're for, but then what can we accomplish, right? The art of the possible. I always tell my staff, don't tell me why we can't, show me how we can, right? And having concrete, identifiable goals and projects, rather than, it's important to vision and to know where we want to be, but it really comes down to putting together action steps. And I think what's also important is doing it in a respectful manner. We live in a time that is incredibly polarized, and the majority of that polarization is along, the liberal-conservative split, the Republican-Democrat split. But, frankly, it's everywhere. And people need to be able to disagree and act and try to work those differences out constructively, and also on a local level, right? Because how we interact with each other is as important as what we do. And I feel in county government, we've been able to get a lot accomplished by looking at all of the above of what I've just mentioned. For example, we have extensive lakes cleanup efforts that are partnerships with our farming community, right? And there was a time not too long ago when people would sit at the table and point fingers at each other, environmentalists pointing at the farmers, farmers pointing at the environmentalists, saying, you don't understand me, you don't care about the environment, whatever, but that doesn't get, we can blame people all day long, and at the end of the day, we're still going to find ourselves in the same place. But if we can focus on that common ground, like I believe we've been able to with our farming community in Dane County, I tell you, you sit down and you get to know these farmers, they care deeply about the environment. And when we can work together and we can come up with programs to help them implement the kind of practices they know and want to implement to reduce runoff, to provide more natural areas, to implement more sustainable farming, they're all over it, and they have a lot of knowledge that we can gain from. So through partnering with them, we've been able to accomplish amazing things and go a great distance in our lakes cleanup efforts. And it's also more sustainable in a political manner. And what I mean by that is so often we're subject to the pendulum, right? So we would put something in place in Dane County, because we're the progressive Democrats, and then the Republicans in the legislature would take it away, and we wouldn't be able to do it. And we don't want our progress to be based on who happens to be in power at that time, right? So if you can partner and do it in a respectful manner, you're changing culture, right? I say right a lot, sorry about that. But I'm hearing my voice bounce back off that wall, and I keep hearing right. So the progress we've made with our environmental and our ag community is going to keep going forward now. regardless of that political pendulum. Now, is there a time when you have to dig in and fight the partisan battle? Absolutely, and I'm there when necessary. But at the same time, when we can achieve sustainable relationships and sustainable development that's not vulnerable to the whims of that political pendulum, that's true sustainability, and that's progress that will remain and continue.
Yeah, when you talk about kind of the future and what you see going on long term, I'm really excited to see how our newest neighborhood develops. It's called Terravesa, and it's really more than just a neighborhood. I really think of it as a community because there's a school there, Mariposa's opening up a child care center there. There's going to be some other opportunities to really bring people together in that area. And not only do they have all that, sustainability is a huge focus of that neighborhood, being environmentally friendly, providing opportunities for people of all, any economic really area, because there's going to be bigger houses, small houses, apartments, and I believe there's going to be both kind of market rate and lower income, I guess, types of housing. So it's really something where you need to have all those things integrated and together in one area. You can't have some people live over here and this area over here is for X. You really need to have it integrated, and that's a community that I really see as being very integrated and also has that sustainability component that's layered kind of over top of everything else. So that's an area that I'm really excited to see as that develops, and the people who are interested in getting in that area and seeing that community, because I really think it's going to be almost like a sub-community of Fitchburg.
So when I think about a vision, the thing that comes to mind is that it's that having the energy in your life to think about being generative or regenerative, and having that energy to spend time on your community in that way is currently really a luxury for people. And that so if we really want that, if we really want a sustainable community, if we really want everybody to have the ability to connect with those values in their day-to-day life, then we have to think about what the barriers are between now and that vision. And I know you're getting there, but that's just where my brain goes immediately, right? So, and we have to recognize that right now the people in our community who are not able to think about what it means to live in a generative world are folks that are working 2 and 3 jobs and don't have childcare and don't have a car, and so it takes them an hour and a half on the bus to get to work, and don't have the financial resources to to do this or to think about it. They don't have the time resources to think about it, and so what does a regenerative world look like? It looks like one where everybody has those resources. And so it implies economic equity at least, but I think it also implies racial equity and an acknowledgement of who has traditionally had power in our country and in our city. And so when I what is the work of sustainability? Yes, there's all this really critical work around climate, which I don't discount in the least, because we have less than a decade, right? And so we just have to do that work, and we have to do it quickly. But if you want to talk about a really sustainable regenerative community, it doesn't happen if we're not addressing the various ways in which inequity really hampers and holds back our community.
I think I would just echo that. I think the first thing that comes to mind is resource. I don't think, we as a society have to figure out how we divvy up our resources better and divvy it up in an equitable way, and that means sometimes certain communities that have traditionally always had the resources aren't going to have those resources, and they're going to be redirected to other communities. I think another sort of part of the vision is making hard decisions, and that means I think we need to do a better job as government, as people, as society, in weighing the human cost of actions versus always thinking about the profit or the jobs. I think we, especially, I know this often put elected officials in really hard places, but they are forced to make a decision on whether something will bring 50, 60 jobs, but what is the outcome, the environmental effects that it has on someone downstream of a power plant. And I know that it always becomes really political, but somewhere along the line, like, we have to make those hard decisions, or we continue to go in the same loop after loop after loop, is where we stand up here as leaders and we say that we believe in equity, but when it comes down to that hard decision, we don't make the hard decision that would actually benefit low income and people of color.
All right, thank you so much. So, in identifying that vision, right, where a regenerative community is available and well-being is available and accessible and thriving for all, okay? You've identified some challenges, and the mayor led the way on identifying some of those. So let's talk about the work. How do we overcome those challenges? And by we, I mean we, the big collective we. How are those challenges overcome? What are some ideas? What else do we need to be doing? We talked about what has worked well. We talked about what the vision can be. And we talked about some of the challenges, right? They emerged. What is needed to coordinate these efforts that are working? And how can we approach that? The big we, the big collective, diverse, full we. How can we approach that? What ideas have you seen, or what ideas might you have with that to achieve that vision?
Well, I'm not short of ideas. I think I want to offer a concept and then maybe one or two examples. And so the concept is that I think traditionally, and probably all of you have moved past this in your own environmentalism, but traditionally I think the environmental movement has thought about what is the impact on the environment, what is this sustainability thing, and then we think about, how do we make that equitable, right? How do we consider other parts of our community in that? Or how do we think about the economic pieces of it? And I would submit to you that we got to flip that, right? So that we have to think about the whole community first, and that it's not going to be truly regenerative if we're not starting with the entire community and then figuring out what's the sustainable thing, right? Because I think a lot of what I would describe as sort of mainstream environmentalism is predicated on a certain lifestyle that's mostly white and middle class. And that's not going to work for everybody. And in fact, it's probably not at all sustainable because our Earth can't really support a white middle class lifestyle for everybody here. So anyway, so that's the concept, is to think about the whole first and then let's figure out the way forward. And in that, so one example that we're working on at the city is thinking about how everybody can be housed. And so I hope all of you know that our region has an affordable housing crisis, and that we need to be thinking about how everybody can be affordably and sustainably housed. And so, what does that look like? That's going to take some creativity, and it's certainly going to take some money from government. And
She looks at me when she says that.
no. Hey, thanks to the council, and I want to acknowledge that Alder Tag Evers is here and had a hand in this. My capital budget includes $5.5 million for affordable housing. But it is going to take all of us. Maybe I should be looking at Wenona when I talk about money. No, in all seriousness, it is going to take money from government, but it's also going to take creativity and, frankly, acceptance from the community. Because what happens now when affordable housing projects are proposed in Madison neighborhoods, I don't know if this happens in Fitchburg or anywhere else, but in Madison neighborhoods, what happens is that some, I hope, small subset of the neighbors turn out and say, oh, no. We couldn't have that here. It's nice. but it's too big, or there's not enough parking, or we don't think it would be quite, it's not pretty enough, and some of them really feel that, and I don't want to judge anybody, but what I hear in those rooms is, we don't want those people living in our neighborhood. And so here's the action, right? The action is, if you do want those people living in your neighborhood, or if you do just want more housing, or more affordable housing, or a city where, or a community where everybody can afford to live, we need you to say yes. Right? We need you to say, yes, I do want that. And maybe it needs some improvement, but I want it, and here's how it could be better. Or I would love for people to say, I want it, and here's how it could be bigger, so we could house more people. That may be asking too much, but I do think it's important, again, coming back to my please say yes to things, and create a constituency. I think that's important. And similarly, another challenge that our community faces is transportation. And there's so many aspects of this, and just starting with the climate impacts of all of us driving our own cars around all the time, that's not sustainable in any way. And so we're trying to make a pretty significant investment in transit in the city of Madison. And I'm really happy that we're partnering with the city of Fitchburg and other surrounding cities to provide transit as well. But we need to have the will in the community to support that, because it's a significant amount of money, and that's not easy to carve out of a budget. And if all we hear is no, it's hard to do it year after year. But if we hear, yes, I like transit, and I want transit, and even if I'm not going to take it, I want it because it means there's going to be less traffic when I do drive, right? That's what we need to hear. So part of the going forward is to talk about what are the practical, to your point, Joe, what are the practical things that we can get done, and to really hear from folks that you want those. And I think, at least City of Madison, we're working hard to deliver sustainability to the community. But we do need to understand which pieces of that you prioritize, and to be able to show support for it.
Yes, how do we overcome some of these challenges? What's the work?
So I think to the mayor's first point, what you refer to as concept, I think is ditto. And I think having that be the motivation and the perspective from which we approach everything. I have a 20-year-old daughter who's a junior at UW, and she's trying to figure out what to do with her life, right? And she wants to make a difference. Dad, should I work for an environmental organization? I care about social justice. She's an East Side kid, so that's how she was raised, and those are her priorities. And there's the concept of, okay, I have to go work for an organization that advocates for this. And my response is, yeah, that's great. That's a viable, impactful path. But what's just as important, what I say to her is, go do anything you want, but bring that perspective to it, right? Because we spend, God, I said right again, I never noticed talking. We spend so much time trying to convince folks or organizations or corporations to behave in a certain manner, but if we become them and bring that perspective to your job, be it a Fortune 500 company or whatever, then I spend so much time driving around this county looking at empty rooftops thinking, why aren't there solar panels on those rooftops, right? And so if we bring that perspective to you, if you're the CFO or the CEO or a worker who's been asked for input, just to make those changes, it should be baked into everything every one of us do. And then it turns into those concrete projects. And as elected leaders, I think it's important that we do the work we believe reflects the priorities of our community. We've been very aggressive in renewable energy, as I mentioned earlier. We take the methane generated from the rotting trash at our landfill and clean it and compress it and fuel vehicles with it. It's the cleanest transportation fuel. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and it saves taxpayers money. That's very sustainable. We're heavily investing in solar power, and as we develop solar power, along with that power, we develop pollinator prairies among the solar panels. We're about to open up next year a 58-acre solar field out at the airport. And when you look at at solar, for example, when we're looking at renewables, it's not just about the energy. When we look at how much money goes out of the community to purchase fossil fuels, those investments that we make in the community in renewables, those are creating jobs. Those are creating jobs locally and keeping those dollars in the community while cleaning up our air.
Yeah, one thing that I don't know all the details about, but I know that Middleton, as what I've been told, when the builder developer comes in and asks for TIF money, they're starting to ask that question, okay, what are you doing in sustainability? And I think solar is kind of the easy low-hanging fruit, but I think that's something that we can look into more, and even as Fitchburg look into more and say, okay, yes, you want this money for your project, but start having some more requirements and ask those questions. What are you doing sustainability-wise, whether it's solar, whether it's other things, to really help the community, help the environment, because that's where we actually have some power, I think, is when they're coming with their hand out and you can say, and have that requirement of, okay, yes, but here's a few more things that we're going to require along with that. And I think, you know, having that commitment is something that could really make a big impact as well.
I think I would just echo what was said, sort of that equity and sustainability need to be, you know, something baked in from the start, and we need to be leading with that. And I think also an earlier comment sort of about the environmental movement, I think I'd like to challenge the environmental movement in trying to be more, at least from my perspective, looking at the statewide scale, you know, being more in touch with all of your constituents. I think we often have conversations not realizing what northern Wisconsin looks like or their struggles. One, I think, thing that I've had a lot of conversations, I have a lot of people come into my office and say, we need to like move to all electric vehicles. And I was like, well, I don't know if we can do that and how quickly. And she's like, they're really, you know, they're gonna be cheap in a couple of years, $15,000, $20,000. And I was like, you know, northern Wisconsin, there are people that don't have cars they can't afford $1,000 cars. They're looking to afford $500 cars. So when we kind of rush forward, because I know we have to do this work urgent, we have to be urgent in this work, but we have to be diligent as well. And we have to think about what some of these decisions and how they affect people outside of this county, outside the state capital. And I also think that goes for environmental justice and making sure that people of color are at the table. My boss often says this in that, you know, he's in so many rooms statewide, nationally, where they're having a conversation about environmental justice, and he looks around the room and he's the only person of color in it. And having traveled now with him for a year, us two are frequently the only people of color. So from the beginning, we have to make sure that all voices are involved and all perspectives are weighed when we make policy decisions.
Urgent but diligent. Yeah, thank you. So this is our last question because this has gone too fast. This is very important work, but we have one last question. Earlier this morning, we had an opportunity to hear from Dane Cunningham about identifying these disruptive moments of change. And after listening to her, I kind of believe that we're here. This is our disruptive moment of change. At once and the same, she identified that these disruptive moments are where we have the highest risk of marginalization, and the most opportunity for more inclusion. These are the moments. So my question to you, and this gets to the destiny portion of the appreciative inquiry framework. What are the strongest opportunities for co-designing a community that offers well-being for all right now in this region, in the communities we serve, statewide, regionally, locally? And what can we do in this room to support that work?
All right, I have two. So the first thing that jumps to mind is that the city is currently undertaking a planning process around South Madison and the Park Street corridor. And it's very closely tied to the fact that in the very near future, we're going to split the town of Madison between the city of Madison and the city of Fitchburg. And that feels to me like there's a lot of threats there, particularly the threat of displacement. but there's a lot of opportunities there too. And so there's an opportunity to think about that planning process and what happens during and from it that could be more regenerative, that could be more inclusive, more sustainable. So that feels like an opportunity to me. The other thing that is an opportunity is slightly more internal facing to the city, but we are in conversations about doing resilience planning to be prepared for the impacts of climate change. And so really asking that question, and we're going to start by asking it internally, but then I think we're going to need to take it more broadly. And I know that Dane County is doing some of this work as well. Those questions around what will our climate look like 10 years, 20 years from now, and what does that mean we have to do now? There's just huge opportunity in that to imagine different ways of doing things.
And this is kind of stating the obvious, but I have to say, vote. When you look at the situation we're in right now, in the federal government and certainly in the state legislature, unfortunately to a great extent due to gerrymandering, we're in we'll call them interesting times right now, right? I mean, when we look at what's going on at the federal level and how close those margins are, particularly in a presidential election and in a gubernatorial election, it's so vital that people vote, that people urge their friends to vote, that people teach the young people in their lives and empower them about the importance of voting, because we certainly feel the impact of it in such a major way. And I think also I think I would just come back to the perspective, and whatever our profession and our daily lives look like, bringing just that, it sounds cliche, but that equity lens to everything that we do, and keep our motivation pure, and try to bring the level of discourse back to a more civil place. I think that's it's not just fluff. I mean, I think that's really crucial for everyone involved. You don't have to dislike someone because you disagree with them. You can still be passionate in your disagreement. You can still advocate and fight for what you believe in and the people and the causes you believe in. But we're in a really, I think, somewhat scary place right now politically in this divide. And I don't think the divisions are going to change, but how we interact with each other can change and really needs to change back to it being okay to disagree and debate and looking for those common areas when we find them. Because when you look at the momentum we have now, particularly on a national level and certainly on a state level, it's not headed in a good place. So it's coming back to, as hard as that is, just kind of to love your neighbor and remember why we're doing this and trying to act with compassion.
I think to piggyback on that too, I think locally, one of the things that I've seen in the last year as mayor that I think is great is a collaboration between so many local people. I know that's something that Mayor Satya has been as focus. I know something that my executive has been a focus. That's something that I've been as a focus for me is making sure that we're all working together, we're sharing ideas, we're collaborating, we're working together, because no one can do this on their own. And the more that we can work together and work on these projects together, the better off we're going to be as a whole. And so that's something that I've personally seen. I know that's something that I appreciate a lot from some of the other leaders here and other people in the area as well. And so I think that's a big key for me as well, is continuing that collaboration.
I think echoing on that, or to echo that, the appetite, I think, is here in Wisconsin because we see local government, cities, counties, doing more environmental work, setting ambitious goals, wanting to offset their footprint. And I also think from an equity standpoint, there is an appetite across our state. I think we slowly but surely we're seeing things. We're seeing an indigenous or a mascot ban at the school board level kind of circulated around the state. So I think that gives me hope. And I think whatever state government can do to signal, or to any of these often can't just do it through the legislative process, but any way that we can provide support at the local level, we want to do. We're really looking on our local governments to lead the way. In addition, I think one thing for the future that gives me hope is seeing people like Stephanie. In the video that we saw earlier, Stephanie is on our climate change task force, and through this, since we've been in office, we've had contact with YCAT and seeing the younger generation of people of not having to have the debate about whether climate change is real, and them, believing science and urging us that we need to make change and that they're committed to making change at this young of an age, I think is a really positive thing, and I think is good for us. And the last thing, similar to vote, I think another thing that people should think about is running for office. I think throughout the country and even in the state, we're seeing that whether there could be gerrymandered districts or not, but because of current events, that progressive people are getting elected in places that you wouldn't think progressive people could be elected. So the more people that have that value, equity, and sustainability in elected positions is going to help us get to our goals much faster.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for taking us on this appreciative inquiry journey about what a society that offers well-being for all could look like, and reminding us that this is an urgent issue that requires diligence, and that equity must not only be a lens, but must be embodied at every corner. Please join me in thanking.